Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's decisive 78-68 victory over Northwestern in Evanston this afternoon. As you can see, no palm trees behind me as I have made it back to the winter wonderland of Michigan. Although we had snow on our way drive back really from Florida about central Georgia all the way back up home. So it was there's a lot there's a lot of snow, not a ton until we got to Michigan, but even Indiana. But it is a long drive down and back, and we had some pretty cold weather even when we were down there. Not that I expect any sympathy from anybody since I knew how cold it was here. Um, but it's some good bonding time for the family, so it was a nice trip. And one of the interesting things, so you're a music guy. So my 18-year-old son, the Spotify lists your top five artists that you listen to throughout the year.
Yeah.
So I've got to tell you what my son's top five listens are for 2024. And I swear he's 18 years old. All right. So his number five is Kenny G.
Okay.
Number four is Vicente Fernandez. Do you know who he is?
I've no
He
idea. I
he
assume
is
he's a Spanish language performer.
he is the goat, as my son says, of mariachi music.
Okay.
Number three is Vivaldi.
Okay.
Number two is Antonio Carlos Jobim, who's like a Brazilian guitar
Okay.
player. And first is Frank Sinatra. So I'm not sure if my son is like a 65-year-old guy stuck. It's probably the most, he's probably the only person on the planet with those five as his top five artists.
Yeah, that's an interesting combination.
Eclectic is just begin to describe it, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, so enough of that. Let's talk about Michigan State's dominant performance on the road in Evanston. I think we said that this would be a tricky game, and in some ways it was, but I think we're starting to see that the Spartans team is not easy to rattle. We said Northwestern doesn't turn over, yet they did it in bunches, especially in the first half, which helped fuel a gigantic run for Michigan State, leading to a 23-point lead. We figured Michigan State would do well on the glass, which they did in the first half, but kind of gave up a lot of offensive rebounds to the Cats in the second,
Yeah.
which led to the score getting a little bit closer. In the end, though, despite being outscored 9 in the second half and sort of limping to the finish line, the 19-point lead was just too much for Northwestern to overcome as MSU's defense and Barnhizer was too good. And frankly, Jeremy Fears is just too good, especially in the first half, continually pressuring Northwestern, shredding their defense, whatever they try to do. I think the story of the game, really, in a word, was Jeremy Fears is just fantastic.
Well, he was definitely one element of the storyline that was critically important. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Look, the Big Ten has a number of very good point guards this year. I think the conversation starts with Braden Smith at Purdue. Then you have
Right.
Bruce Thornton at Ohio State, Ace Baldwin at Penn State, Gillespie kid at Maryland has played very well. Jackson Shellstead at Oregon has done some nice things. Um, and they're and then geez, how could I forget Jacko Cilionis at Illinois, although it remains to be seen whether he plays again,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
which we can talk about a little later. Um, but I'm of a mind that when you're talking about the totality, meaning offense, getting your own offense, creating for others, and what you do defensively, and then you can also throw in some intangible stuff. I
Yeah.
think Jeremy Fears is having an outstanding year. He's unlikely to get the kind of all conference sort of recognition because of the sheer number of guys I just mentioned and how much some of those guys score, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe he's third in the conference behind Braden Smith and Baldwin in assists per game. And guaranteed, I haven't checked this, but I bet my life he's playing significantly less minutes
Yeah. Right. The
than
assists per
either of
minute's
those guys.
probably higher.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
I believe he's top 5 in assist rate nationally. I think that's true. So that would be, simply put, assists per minute that
Mm-hmm.
he's playing. He's top 5 in the nation. And I don't find that hard to believe. And
No.
he's very clearly starting to hit a stride now. I mean, he had a double-double in their last game and almost pulled it off again today. I was pretty sure he was going to, and then the assist just didn't happen
Yeah.
late in the game. He ended up with 8. I think he had 6 in the first half. So, but just playing such a poised game. I mean, today it was so obvious No, this is a. I don't want this to come off too strongly in a negative sense, but the difference today between when Jeremy was running the offense, when Trey Holloman, or even to some extent Jace Richardson were running the offense was stark.
Yeah.
I really felt like a good part of the reason Northwestern did shrink that lead and got it even into single digits a few times late had to do with a long stretch that Jeremy was sitting and other guys were running the offense, and the offense just was not as good. So he's definitely playing top-notch basketball. And I would say this. If you can, and the whole group, so Holloman and Richardson combined are also playing excellent defense. But if you can find two better guards anywhere who are playing defense together the way that Jeremy Fears and Jaden Akins are, I'd like to see it. Jaden Akins, and this was something I don't recall if we spent it. I think we talked about it a little bit that there might be. I think we did because we said this is one where maybe the matchups will. We even wondered if there might be a difference in the starting lineup. I didn't think there would be, but it was worth
Right.
discussion because their Barnhizer as a 3 or Martinelli, whichever one you want to say is the 3. Posed some real problems. Well, Jaden Akins is going to have to guard that guy. Well, Jaden Akins did guard Barnhizer a ton and shut his ass down.
Yeah.
That was impressive. I mean, I could not be, and Jeremy Fears was also a big part of the Michigan State defensive effort in this game. Those two guys are just, in particular, are just guarding at an elite level right now. And it's good to see. But yeah, Jeremy Fears, definitely the tone setter. I think the first half might be the best half of basketball they've played this year, considering everything, the opponent, being on the road. The other thing worth mentioning too, and Tom Izzo talked about this in the post game, Michigan State apparently had some trouble getting liftoff out of Capital City yesterday. So they didn't even have a shoot around. And consider they had a quick turnaround. They played on Thursday, and then had to play and then had to play Sunday at 11 a.m. local time. So quick turnaround. Then you don't even get to Evanston until significantly later. I forget how long he said they were delayed. Something like 4 hours.
Yeah, 4 hours. I think,
that's a big deal. And Northwestern had been sitting for a week. So Northwestern had all the advantages. And it didn't, and Michigan State still came out and just buried them in that first half. Up by 18 at the break. They had led by as much as 23.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It was really, really impressive stuff. And then the second half, we didn't really see it so much against Washington, at least not to this degree. But we talked about it, that how impressive it was that they actually built on that 29-point halftime lead in the Washington game, because you don't typically see that when you've got that big a spread. Today was more of the standard situation that you see where the team with the big lead just doesn't have that same focus and mentality in the second half. And I think that's what we saw from Michigan State. You saw the turnovers spike, and they were mostly, it wasn't a result of Northwestern just getting out there and playing great defense. I thought when Northwestern pressured MSU, they generally did an outstanding job handling it. Really impressive. But it was just lazy stuff, a lot of it, unfocused stuff. You mentioned the defensive rebounding just kind of collapsing. Northwestern's not a good offensive rebounding team at all. So that was a real, real disappointment to see that. And it's all, and then offensively, I thought where they were so good in the first half was exactly what we talked about, that the movement, the energy, the pace that they were playing with in the half court was outstanding.
Yeah.
And that slipped. Now, whether that was to some degree by intent, whether Michigan State came out and said, hey, let's just shrink this game. Let's just make sure we're using a lot of clock. And there were times where it felt like that's exactly what was going on.
Certainly later. Yeah, definitely later. Yeah.
But if that was the case, and I get it, you're trying to win the game. You're not trying for style points. I understand that. And you can say, well, it was effective because, in the end, Northwestern just did not have enough possessions.
Right.
I didn't like what that did to Michigan State. Michigan State is not Northwestern. They're not a team that I think is built to play very well if they're going to just squeeze the clock and take 25 seconds off it every time they touch the ball. That's just not where they're good. And so I think all of those things kind of showed up in the second half. It was disappointing, but you got to look at the big picture. You go into a tough place. They hadn't lost a home yet this year. They've had Michigan State's number lately in recent years in that building. We had talked about 2 or 3. I believe it's actually 4 of the last 6. And Michigan State went in and controlled that game more or less for the last 35 minutes.
35, yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's worth celebrating. You're 5-0, 3 road wins. Yeah, people could talk about they haven't played the toughest possible schedule thus far, and I'd agree. But this is the Big Ten, and you got to win every game that's there on your schedule to play. And they are doing that. And not only are they doing that, they're beating the hell out of people.
I was going to say, we don't normally see margins like this consistently in the Big Ten. I mean, you will have your laughers from time to time, but not usually on the road. And they've had, Minnesota's not very good. So that you can almost discard that one. But they won pretty handily at Ohio State by 7. Today was obviously a very easy win. Once they got that big win, they they gave up half their lead.
Both Ohio State and Northwestern could have and probably should have been bigger margins than they were.
Sure.
They still ended up 7-10, but the way those games were played, I would argue those scores were flattering to the home team in both of those cases. But
that happens on the road. That's just what always happens on the road.
Absolutely. There's no shame in it. Now, I would say, I posted about this on the Spartan Mag board, and I may be a victim of recency bias here, but I don't remember a time in the Big Ten where there were as many gigantic blowouts as we are seeing. We've spent all this time talking about how big free throws are going to be because, most Big Ten games are played in this narrow window. And of course, I still know that's true. But my God, Penn State just beat Nebraska by exactly the same margin today as Michigan State did when they played them, 36.
Purdue.
Purdue, sorry.
Yeah.
I say Penn State. I'm watching.
You're watching Penn State
here. Lose, unfortunately, to Oregon. Purdue just waxed them at Mackey today. Michigan State's done it to 2 teams. Both teams they played at home, Washington and that Nebraska team, they've beaten by an average of 35 points. We saw Illinois go into Oregon last weekend and wax them by, I think it was 32.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of this stuff. Michigan ended up with a pretty healthy margin. I think it was like 18 or 19 in the end. Yeah. Wasn't it at UCLA?
Right. And Iowa just won by 25 last night.
There you go.
Home. Yeah.
There you go. So we're seeing a ton of these, and it's just, I don't know what's going on, but it's really striking to me that we're seeing this happen, and I'm not sure what the explanation is because
there are more games. Do you think it's just because there are more teams now, so you're more?
Maybe,
I don't know. I mean,
and you could say,
stick out to you. I guess I don't know.
You can say, well, it's so many of these teams are basically reinventing themselves on the fly every year, but that's not new.
No,
that was the case last year, and that was the case the year before that. And I don't think we've seen this. I don't know what it is. And the other thing you could say is if you were saying, well, it's a West Coast team, their third trip east, the back end of a 2-game trip, they were out of gas. But we're not in that scenario yet.
No. Even that's not doesn't describe most of the blowouts anyway.
Even Michigan State tattooing Washington. That was the first game. Washington had been there for 2 days, as Danny Sprinkle said. He'd like to be able to say it was travel related, but he knew it wasn't. So, and they were actually much better today against Michigan on the back half of their trip. So, I don't know what it is, but man, it's happening with frequency that at least anecdotally seems to me to be very unusual.
Yeah.
And it's also not necessarily predictable because you'd say Nebraska's taken 2 36-point losses already. So you would normally say that's an awful team, right?
Yeah.
And most years you'd be right. I don't think they're awful. They're
Yeah.
2-3 in the league. I fully expect them to be at least in contention for a tournament bid when it's all said and done. Now, it is actually true that if they're on the bubble, losses like that, just train wreck losses, might tilt the balance one way or the other for them. That would be unfortunate, but that's not a bad basketball team at all. But they've had it happen to them twice. Now, granted, you can also say it happened to them in arguably the two toughest environments in the league.
Yeah.
Certainly two that are right at the top in Breslin and Mackey. But man, it's hard to get a grip on what's happening in this conference.
Well, and that's why we said it's going to be a couple weeks before we have any idea really who anybody is, right? Well, if
I
anyone's any
don't.
good, but
I'm beginning.
maybe we'll never know.
I'm beginning to think, other than I think stating the obvious, I think Michigan State and Michigan have both done enough thus far
Yeah.
to suggest that, yeah, they're probably going to be in that mix. Purdue has kind of gotten back on the beam again. It's kind of the Michigan State story. They're not necessarily playing the best opposition lately, but they're beating the hell out of people. They blew
Yeah.
this Northwestern team out by, I think it was 18 the other day, and then they beat Nebraska today by 36. You got to give them their due. So there are teams like that, but man, you get much past that. I, I don't know. Even Illinois, depending upon health, I mean, to lose at home, even without their point guard, to that USC team by 10,
By 10, yeah, double digits. That's bad.
I have no idea. I thought I was dialed in on what Illinois was. Very good team both ways. Not really any obvious weaknesses. Now, I don't know. So, yeah,
Not for lack of watching basketball either, right? I mean, you've watching plenty of these games.
Yeah. No, I know they've done good things, but you see a game like that, and then on top of it, you look at the health situation potentially.
Yeah,
And
well,
now now I start thinking, well, are they really going to be a title contender? I don't know.
Well, let's talk about this game a little bit too. About I think one of the things we talked about in the pregame, briefly at least, was that we thought this may be a game where we see a little more of Fiddler. And we definitely saw that today. He was tasked with guarding Barnhizer in the Martinelli combo. And I think played pretty well. I mean, he had 8 points, 3 for 6 from the field. He had that hand grenade he missed, 2 for 2 from the line, and had 5 rebounds. So one of them offensive. So he was very active, played 16 minutes more than he's played for quite a while. It's for a number of games. I can't remember how long it's been since he's played that many minutes. But I thought he was very positive impact in the game, and it was kind of nice to see him get back. He had that one turnaround late, which I thought it looked like his sort of his typical shot, and he missed that. But aside from that, I liked his game.
He had a big steal too in the second half when Northwestern was kind of
on
starting to
Barnhizer
push.
or Martinelli, maybe. I think it's Martinelli.
Yeah. No, I thought it was a real step forward for Frankie. Look, the bottom line is this. There are things he can bring to the table for Michigan State that nobody else on this roster can.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, the first basket he hit, where he went hard to the rim and finished through traffic, could have gotten an N1 call even potentially.
Right.
He's got that because he not only has a knack for scoring in those situations, but just physically, he's a different kind of guy. They don't have anybody else who's his size. We talk about the season Cohen Carr's had, and it's been great. But Frankie's a different kind of player than Cohen. He's definitely more skilled at this stage than Cohen is. So there's something there that he can bring. And we've even though he hasn't been doing a ton of it, we've talked from the start of the season about his knack for drawing fouls and getting to the line. That's another thing that I think he's kind of has a specialty in that sets him apart a little from everybody else on the team. The fact that he is 6'6", 6'7", and can play the wing, so he's a guy who you can play against a Barnhizer and at least know that you've got a physical match. And I thought he hung in there defensively pretty well in this game.
Mhm.
I think he's hunted there defensively all year. He's far from their best defender, but it hasn't been a weakness the way I thought it might be at the start of the year. His issues have been the areas we thought he'd be really good, which is on offense. But yeah, I very happy with the way he played. I think every bucket he made was impressive and showed the range of what he could do. So the first one was that make through contact at the rim. The second one was the fake
Yep.
and then step into about probably a 17, 18-foot jumper. And that's another element of his game that maybe is a little bit of a separator for him from everybody else. And then the third basket was that great cut he made when I think it was Jackson was in some trouble down low. And Jackson, fortunately, also gets a lot of credit for it. Kind of kept the play alive and kept looking and saw Frankie cutting down the lane, and then Frankie just flushed it with a dunk. All very impressive stuff. And then in the second half, he ended up with 2 free throws. That got him his 8 points. But yeah, very definitely a nice step forward for him. And who knows? That 3 he hit against Washington might be something that we look back at and say, well, that's kind of where his confidence started to come back. Because I think even the plays he didn't convert today, he was playing aggressively again.
Yeah, he looks like
You
he did
know?
at the beginning of the season.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
Yeah, well, and I think you're just going back to the Kohler. Impressive that the second on the team in assists this game was Kohler with 5.
yeah. He
He
was
is,
really good.
I mean, we've mentioned a number of times he's had a really good pass here and there, but he had a lot today. And even Cooper had 2 pass, but the one around the back, behind the back pass that Kohler had ended up just being a foul for Zapala. He
Yeah,
didn't
he
end up
didn't
getting
get the. I
big
was gonna
assists there,
say.
but that, I mean, he looks much more comfortable knowing where people are going to be, I guess, is maybe the best way of putting it. And just
Yeah,
and I thought the same thing with Cooper. Like Cooper, when he got the ball, the double's coming. He didn't panic, right? I felt like he knew someone was going to be open. He was looking for him, and it's a progression from him from where he was last year, maybe even earlier this year.
Zapala is the one guy in that group that I think, and Izzo's alluded to it. He didn't call him out specifically. He was talking about the bigs in general, but I think very clearly there's a difference right now between the way
Yeah,
he's handling doubling and the other 2 guys who have made real progress. So he's the guy that they've got to bring along a little bit in that area. But I'm confident because I've also seen him make. So I think in inherently he's a solid passer. I just think he's getting sped up a little bit right
yeah.
now. But yeah, really impressive stuff from Jackson in that regard. It was good to see.
Yeah, the final thing I just say about Fears, and we'll go back to him, but just this he felt not like Cassius, but I think just the sense would people seem to know what they, I don't know if it's it just at the scouting report, he seemed very, very comfortable. He didn't seem at all bothered by the pressure that Northwestern had, and it was almost like he was always probing and just kind of that he knew what they were going to do before they did it, and he was able to at times, especially in the second half, where I think the first half they definitely were offensive were clicking, like you mentioned, but the second half he was able to calm them down and sort of just
Yep.
do what needed to be done. Sometimes it required him scoring. He had a couple crazy shots that went in, which I think were kind of lucky in some respects. But anyway, that the point is, I think he had took charge of the game and seemed comfortable, and I think that that calming presence is important. That's you saw that from for a guy like Bettine Cleaves. You see from really good point guards. The fact that he's a freshman and sort of gives me that feeling, which I imagine he does the same as teammates, is pretty remarkable.
Somebody, one of the MSU media figures, I forget who it was. I saw this on Twitter post game. Made the point that what Jeremy Fears is doing is pretty remarkable because he's both serving as the emotional fulcrum of this team. Like he's the guy who fires everybody up. He's the guy who's
Right.
getting into
Mm-hmm.
people. And yet he's also providing, as you just mentioned, when they need it, that calming presence. I mean, that second half, not that it ever got tight,
It could
but
have
there were a couple of moments, right, where it was
on the road.
teetering.
Yeah.
If they had gone one more possession without scoring, then maybe Northwestern starts to actually feel it
Right.
and the emotion starts snowballing on you. That can happen on the road, especially. And in those moments, Jeremy Fears really stepped up. I mean, the only knock on him was something he's been so good at this year with the free throw line.
Yeah.
He was 3 for 7. That's surprising, but other than that, man, top notch game from him. I'm with you, and they gotta, you can't let the second half disappointments overshadow the totality of this.
No.
They got a lot of good basketball out of a lot of people. Jaden Akins helped out with some free throws at the end, but even on a day where he wasn't as efficient as, say, he was against Washington, he still ends up with 14. As I talked about earlier, a whale of a job defensively
Yeah.
on Barnhizer for large segments of that game. I thought Jace Richardson in the first half, especially, I don't know what he ended up. I guess he ended up with 13 points, so he was second high. And still a good day, even though the second half he was not as dialed in. He was 4 for 8, 1 for 2 from 3, 4 for 5 at the line. But I just thought he had a little bit of a game or two lull, I thought, where
Yeah.
he wasn't quite as impactful as he had been. Like there was a point maybe coming out of Maui where I know we started to talk about it as, well, this may be your alpha. This may end up being your guy.
Right.
And I don't think it's evolved that way, but man, he is tough for people to deal with. And it's mostly because I think his court sense and his body control is, and that's not something we talk about often with regard to players, but you have to talk about it with him because he is a rare, rare bird in the sense that he can get himself, say, into the lane and up in the air and manage to put his body in midair in the best position to convert a basket.
Squares up every time.
Yeah, and they're never, it's never something that you look at. It's not like his dad where like, he has those, or Cohen Carr, where he has these moments that just lift people out of their seats. But if you understand what he's doing, it's incredibly impressive how easy he makes those plays look. So those three guards were outstanding today, all three of them. And then I think that was really the difference, is that their guards were so much better than Northwestern's. And even Trey Holloman, who did not have a great day, 1 assist, 3 turnovers. That again, I thought the offense bogged down with him at times in a way that we don't normally see. He still scored 8 points, had 3 rebounds. So he still contributed to this game. He just maybe wasn't as steady as everybody else. But yeah, I really like MSU's guards, stating the obvious.
Yeah, Akins also with 5 steals, which just goes along with his defense.
Huge. And he had one segment in particular there where he just kind of took the game over with that defense. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's they are a fun team to watch, and I don't want to make any predictions like they're for real, but you can't look at them right now and say that lots of elements of their game is real. Like this is a tough team, and if I would not want to prep for this team, if I'm the
they present a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, only the highest minute total was Fears at 27. They just throw waves of bodies, and they all bring a little something different, and they're all capable in their own way. And all those lineup changes people complained about early in the year, it all makes sense now, right? Like you have a field like these guys are used to playing each other and being plugged and played in different situations. And so anyway, it's
well, let's to drill down on that just for a second. Here's the thing that I think is really helpful with what Michigan State has done. This is a team where you could say, well, they don't have any superstars. I happen to think that there are minimum 2 to 3 guys on this team that I can see having NBA careers. I think Richardson is a lock. And I think that Booker and Carr are possibilities, depending obviously a lot on how things go from here as they continue to develop. But they're not devoid of talent. This business and it's amazing to me how often over the years it gets said about Michigan State, like Tom Izzo's going out there and winning with a bunch of D3 guys. No, he's generally been, over the course of his tenure, he's been the best recruiter in the Big Ten. They just haven't had the Calipari or Krzyzewski classes. But they continue, and this year's team they got 2 McDonald's All-Americans.
Is that good?
Yeah, and most of their guys, everybody who's a scholarship player, except for Coop, and I'm take out the two transfers because that's different.
Sure.
But putting them aside, everybody except for Coop and maybe McCullough are top 100 recruits.
Yeah.
So that's like 9 guys. That's normal for Michigan State. That's what they have. But anyway, what I was going to say is the thing that's interesting about this team, without that pecking order, well, we've got our 35-minute a night guys, and then they don't have that.
Right.
What it allows them to do is, and I think you see this reflected game to game, is kind of feel what's happening in that particular game, and minutes get adjusted in that game accordingly. So
Yeah.
today, Frankie Fiddler, who has not been playing a lot lately, he's been limited to, he's had some single digit games
Yeah. Like
in terms of
9
minute
minutes.
played.
Yeah.
Right. Well, today he was obviously more productive. Did he play more? Yes, he did. And that meant that maybe we saw a little less of Cohen Carr. I don't know what Cohen.
16 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So a
there you
lot. He's
go.
been
There
averaging
you go.
about mid 20s.
And Cohen wasn't bad.
No.
It was just Frankie was a little better. I think that's what they've done all year long at the center spot, particularly between Zappala and Cooper. Now today, Zappala played 19 and Coop played 15.
Yeah, and he
But
fouled out, so he could play
you
more.
see Xavier Booker's minutes tend to kind of ebb and flow
Mm-hmm.
depending upon how well he's playing. Today, I didn't think he played very well, so he didn't play as much. But they do that, and that's a nice component to have, because teams that have a couple or three guys that they know they're going to play no matter what, if those guys happen to be having an off day, it can be very tough for those teams to deal with it. And those teams probably don't have another option, whereas Michigan State does at every position. If one guy's not getting it done, Michigan State's got another card to play.
Yeah.
And it usually means over the course of 40 minutes, they're going to find some answers. Now, we're going to find out, and they meant, Jim Jackson mentioned this on the broadcast, and I do think it's a fair point to say, we'll find out as they get into the gauntlet of the rest of their Big Ten schedule and into March, how much it matters that they don't have, if it remains that they don't. I still think there's a chance Jaden Akins, as I talked about, or in the Washington game, or maybe it was the preview for this one, I can't remember.
Preview this one, yeah.
Yeah. I can see Jaden Akins maybe having that Travis Trice kind of late season step up, even from where he's at currently, which is pretty good. But let's assume that doesn't happen. It's fair to say, well, when you step up in class, that can be a problem when you don't have a guy who, no matter what, is an answer to your problems. Fair enough. But as you had said, I think trying to game plan for Michigan State has got to be a really tough task right now. Has to be.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where it's going to come from. You can feel reasonably certain that some of their guards are going to hurt you, but you don't know who might really be on that day. You just, when you start to think, well, Cohen Carr is the guy in that kind of role, well, Frankie Fiddler steps back up. You never know which of the centers might do it.
Yeah.
So is Book going to have a big game? He can. He's done that at times. Doesn't always do it. So they're going to be a tough team to deal with. And getting beyond that, I'm with you. I think that, as I've stated recently, I think we've seen enough to feel pretty confident that Michigan State's got a high floor. When you defend the way they do, when you rebound the way they do, when you shoot free throws the way that they do, I think it's hard to imagine this being a team that, let's put it this way, I don't think they're going to be this year's version of what Wisconsin was last year, where they got off to a hot start in the league and then just faded. I don't see that. Knock on wood, I just don't see it. I don't know yet whether they're truly, right now, their track record, everything they've done suggests that they belong in any conversation as to who the best team is in this league. Absolutely, without question. But have they proven that? Is that absolutely going to be what happens? No, you can't say that.
You got to
But
win games.
You can't say it about anybody in this
Exactly.
league.
Yeah. Right.
Not
Yeah.
yet. Not when you're. I mean, we're a quarter of the way now, as of today, through the Big Ten season for Michigan State. And there's a handful of teams that are a little bit further along than that. But um, but God, you got to be very happy with where they are. Because as we keep saying, the other thing is we can all easily see ways in which individuals and the team can continue to improve from here.
Oh yeah.
It's not like they've topped
Absolutely.
out.
Right. Yeah. Well, and today was the inflection point for the season. So they are now on the back half of the season. This was the
Over the
16th to the 31st game or something like that. So
Gotcha. Yeah, so there's enough hay in the barn, so to speak, to say that you've got a read on them. You've got enough of a read on them to feel, I think, reasonably confident in knowing where the strengths are.
yeah.
And and that should lead you to conclude that it can only the picture is likely to only get so bad from here. The question that remains, though, is how good is the upside? How much better can they get? And is what we know that they are enough to win them a championship and put them in position to go on a big run in March? That we do not know.
Right. Well, what we do know is that they definitely kept Barnhizer in the gutter, and he feels like I'm sure he would like a redo for that game because he did not play well, and Michigan State shut him down largely behind Jaden Akins. And that, of course, is our segment with the Brothers Just Do Gutters, because all they do is gutters. Even in this weather, they'll come out and clean out your gutters. They'll go ahead and replace things, fix them, whatever needs to be done, whether it's your home or your business. The brothers are the ones you should call first so they can get the ladders so you don't have to, so you can stay safe and, frankly, just stay warm. So they came out and did my gutters in February, so I know they'll come out in this kind of way. And the weather wasn't any better, I promise you, when they came and did my gutters in February. And now I got rid of the tree that was growing my gutter and all kinds of other issues. So anyways, now my front door is great. I don't have to restain it all the time. It's wonderful. So contact the Brothers Just Do Gutters. You get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate, either on the west side or the east side of the state. You can get a hold of Kurt or Greg. You can find ways to contact them at our support page at thefinalfoursonschedule.com/support. And as mentioned, Brooks Barnhizer was the guy who needed to be kept in the gutter by Michigan State because he was the most dynamic of the two. I mean, the two leading scorers were pretty much identical as far as point production, Barnhizer and Martinelli. Martinelli obviously had a lot of points today and played a pretty good game, but Brooks Barnhizer, I don't think there's any question that was Michigan State's focus was to shut him down and not worry quite as much about Martinelli, just because he leads the team in assists and kind of is the do everything guy. And he didn't do much of anything this game. He was 2 for 13 from the field. Those field goals, I think, came late in the game as well. 0 for 6 from 3, didn't have any free throw attempts, only finished with 4 points. He had 8 rebounds, 3 of them offensive, which is good. 3 assists, which is, I think, less than what he averages. Doesn't he average like 5 a game?
Close.
He had a couple turnovers. He had 1 steal, even though he averages over 2 a game, or almost 2 a game. He had a couple blocks, but he was relegated to the gutter for sure for this game, and he was not able to do what Northwestern needed him to do in order to stay competitive in this game.
Yeah, it was, and there were other guys that got their cracks at him. You mentioned there were segments where Frankie Fiddler guarded him. There were points where Cohen Carr guarded him, but that was a lot of Jaden Akins, and hats off to him, because this was the one matchup that I really worried about coming into this game for MSU
Right.
defensively. It's not just that there's a 3 or 4 inch height difference. It's the way Barnhizer plays. He's so physical. And I just wondered, boy, is Jaden going to be able to hold up against that? In ways like Jaden's obviously going to compete. We know that. But I worried about maybe foul trouble, those types of things. Did not happen. It went the other way. Michigan State frustrated him the entire game. And this was not a case, believe it. This was not a case where you go back and you look at the tape and say, oh, a great performance was there for Barnhizer to have. He just missed shots. He was getting shots all day that he should have hit. They bottled him up. And as you mentioned, some of the other things he does. He's their main dynamic force offensively as a creator. They held him like an assist and a half below his average, and they forced a couple turnovers against him. He wasn't as disruptive defensively as he
Yeah.
normally is. The rebounding was okay. That was close to being on par with what he does for them. But this is 2 straight games. They did it to Osobor, who, you look at the way he played against Michigan today, and that guy, more or less got back on track. I think he actually exceeded his seasonal average in the first half in scoring against Michigan. So he got back on track. But you look at the problem, Michigan State just frustrated the hell out of him, visibly frustrated him.
Yeah.
And now we have this game where Barnhizer, Martinelli had a great game. So you can't take away everybody. But they took away either 1 or 1A on the scouting report in this game. And that's 2 straight games. We'll actually make that 3 because they did it to Bruce Thornton too.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So we are starting to see something that, and I think we've talked about this recently. It seems like I'm recalling this came up. Good Michigan State teams historically have done a good job defensively in taking away, and that doesn't mean completely eliminating, but in limiting the opponent's best player. That has been something that has been a telltale sign of a good Michigan State team, has been the ability to do that. I'm talking about over Tom Izzo's entire tenure. They've done that.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see this team doing it because that's 3 straight.
I'd also point out that if you those 3 players you mentioned, one's a guard, one's a point guard, the other's a forward, and the third was a center. Now, Osobor, you can say, well, he's 6'8", and so I get that. So
he's a center.
He's not a 7-foot center, right? Like, so you could say, well, they have been challenged with like Golden, for instance, but they have kind of shut down every position. The best players, which shows the versatility this team has defensively.
Absolutely, that they could take away guys of any type at any spot. And again, that doesn't mean, nobody has success. Martinelli had a very good game against them. But it's, this Northwestern team, for example, I spent a lot of time talking about it. 2-headed monster. And they rely a ton on those 2 guys. And when you take one of them away, ball game.
Yeah. Well,
that's it. If you had told me going into this game, Brooks Barnhizer is going to be held to 4 points, I would have said Michigan State wins. No question. That's it. I don't need to know anything else. and that truthfully, I think that was, you could talk about a lot of different elements of this game, but if you want to pick one thing, that'd be a pretty good one to focus on.
Yeah.
As to why they won.
All right. So then, who cleans a glass best? We know who cleans your windows best, and that would be the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Whether you're in the Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo area, they have a very large region. Make sure you contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids to clean off your house. They do power washing. They'll wash your windows, even this weather. They'll get up on the ladder so you don't have to. They'll go inside your house, take care of the interior part of the windows, the windowsills, the screens. They did that in our house, and it was the first time our windows have been cleaned probably ever. And they also do interior painting, and which I've been reminded, I talked about the bad paint selection I made the year before, or in the past with my son with a friendly frog. So my wife wanted to remind me, that the paint, our original paint choice was for our house was bagel. And it was like an orange, and she, hated that. And she said it was my fault because I thought, oh, what a cool name, bagel. That's kind of fun. And so anyway, I don't remember this, but apparently I was the reason that we had a bad paint job on our house for many years. So
she's very clearly looking to avoid any culpability.
Yeah.
In that selection. It's entirely on you.
Yes.
Bagel is an orange? Really? It seems like at most it should be like a tan.
Yeah. In my defense, it was a tan, but when it's on the house, it looked kind of orange. And especially on a sunny day, the orange shows up more. And so anyway, it didn't look anything like a bagel. Yeah. So much like my son's friendly frog looked much different on the wall in the sunlight than it did in the store at Home Depot. I promise you. So anyway, Squeegee Squad if you make a mistake, the paint choice, they'll come in and they won't choose a better paint for you. Much like, they're not going to, if someone makes your cake, they're not going to tell you picked the wrong spouse, but they're going to give you the best cake you get. Squeeze Squad will do a great job painting your room or whatever in the interior. So get a hold of them. 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that, of course, at our support page, Final Four on the schedule.com/support. So unfortunately, now you're on a heater. You've gotten two in a row. You got your
Boom.
combination. Yeah, I had Kohler, who
This was tight. This
it
was tight
was.
today,
So
right?
it was.
One
Yeah,
rebound.
yeah. It
Yeah.
was Kohler. I had Kohler and Carr, and they had 5 and 4, and you had Zapala and Cooper, and they had 5 and 5. And so, and interestingly, Fiddler had 5 too. So the rebounds really spread out more in this game than they have been in the previous games.
We haven't seen a game like this in quite a while, where it was that kind of and honestly, uh, I think I think it's probably part of the reason a little bit why Michigan State was a little disappointing on the boards was that they didn't have, say, Jackson doing his usual job cleaning up the defensive glass.
Yeah.
Like what did he have? I think he only had, was it one offensive rebound
No, he had 4
or
offensive and one
one
defensive. Yeah,
defensive? I
right.
mean, yeah,
Exactly.
that's not a good sign.
Yeah, Fiddler had
Uh,
4 defensive as well as did Carr, and then
yeah,
offensive rebounds is pretty much it was mostly Kohler. Sabala had
yeah,
2 and Fiddler had 1, and I think Cooper had 1.
yeah. I'll take it.
Yeah.
So that puts me on top now, right? Six
No, we're
five.
tied at 6-all
We're tied at 6-0.
I
Oh,
was
that's
down
right. You were
4-3.
up 6-4. Yep.
I had 3 in
Okay.
a row, and I was starting to get a
All
little
right.
fat.
Well,
Yeah, feeling.
I think this change has worked.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Now
brought
I like how now you're supportive of
competitiveness.
this change. Now that you're
Oh, you're
got
right.
to-
I would have been decrying the
yeah,
fundamental unfairness of it. But no, it's inarguable that there's been it's tougher.
it is.
It's
Yeah,
made
it
it tougher.
makes it more interesting. It makes it more complicated for me watching the game, knowing
Yeah.
who I want to get the rebounds. So
Right.
anyway, because my memory is not good after like one day doing this taping the show. All right, so let's talk about the 5 keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. I'm wearing again. I've wore this all my Nudge Printing stuff through Florida because it was pretty cold. It was like we had highs most of the time in the 50s. The lows were in the 30s or 40s. We were at Universal Studios on Tuesday, and I think it got up to 53 or something, but that it started at 40 degrees. And so I had my Michigan State, my Final Four on the schedule hoodie. I had some long sleeve shirts I would try to golf in, which was pretty cool too. Again, not looking for sympathy because I realized I was golfing. I golfed a couple times and I was able to golf, and you guys are in the snow. So anyway, check out Nudge Printing. They have great stuff at nudgeprinting.com. They've been the longest sponsor of the show because they frankly just have really awesome stuff. Super comfortable, very breathable, like their hoodies and stuff. My daughter has a jacket she loves. I've got a quarter zip and a couple t-shirts and stuff. And so anyway, it's just fantastic stuff, all made here in the state of Michigan. So you can't go wrong. 20% off if you type in Final Four when you go to the checkout. So check them out. Support Gabe and Brittany. They do great things, and they have just a fantastic selection of just stuff from Michigan State and then other schools in the state of Michigan, as well as Indiana and Iowa. All right, so 5 keys of the game. The first key of the game was Evanston. And so Michigan State's had trouble there. All right, well, they won. So I guess you could say that they didn't. And then certainly by the second half, you pretty much just heard the go green, go white cheers. And they had pretty much taken out the fans, despite it sounds like they were offering a free breakfast bar for all the, a breakfast burrito bar for all the students to show up at the game. So maybe it didn't work.
Yeah. Look, given how things have gone in that place in recent years, this is clearly a check mark because Michigan State not only won the game, but they controlled it.
Yeah.
And that's tough to you look at recent history in this particular matchup in that building. You look at the fact that Northwestern was unbeaten this year, and I believe I saw a stat that said they had, I don't know if it was it must have been the 3rd longest streak in the league, maybe, or maybe the country. And in any event, they had a very long streak of wins at home in their favor. And then, as we talked about, it's not like, well, this is a program that was riding a streak primarily based on what other guys who were no longer around had done. Right. This is a veteran group. I mean, 4 of their 5 starters are long-term guys for this team. 4 of them, I believe, are guys at least with starting experience, if not full-time starters. That's a tough equation to deal with. And as we also talked about, there was no reason in the world for that group to come into this game not feeling confident because those guys have beaten Michigan State.
Many times, multiple
yeah, and
places.
they
Yeah, right.
right, but then they especially at Welsh Ryan, so they had to feel confident, and they also had to feel this is the other thing too, which we really didn't focus that much on, but I think it was another factor, or should have been. Northwestern came into this game, nothing's over 5 games into the season, but they came into this game 1-3 in the
Little,
league.
yeah, desperation, a
And
little bit. Yeah.
you would have thought that, and that it was something that I wondered about is, man, can Michigan State just match the intensity that these guys are going to bring to the first 10 minutes of the game?
Right.
Because I really thought Northwestern would come out with their hair on fire. And that really did not happen. Michigan State was largely the aggressor and the more assertive team in this game. So full check mark on this one. MSU handled it, and it looked a lot more like the way we got used to games in that building looking over the years.
Yeah. I
You
would say,
know?
watching that Illinois USC game, that was a game where you saw USC. They just definitely had brought the energy, the physicality, and that Illinois just didn't have it that day, on Saturday. This was not a game where I felt like Michigan State totally punked Northwestern. They just were playing really smooth basketball. I think Northwestern had a little bit more on the second half, but it was a little too late. So anyway, like you said, check mark for Michigan State there.
One other thing I
Evanston.
want to bring up since you brought up Illinois, and it's a callback to the Washington game when we're talking about home court venues. Tom Izzo spent a ton of time in the post game talking about how great the Izzone alumni was.
Yeah.
And I've seen people mention and say, well, how do other schools handle that? And I went and looked. I didn't see much of the Illinois USC game yesterday, unfortunately. I saw about 5 minutes of it in the first half. But I went and looked on one of the Illinois boards, and there was a lot. Students were not back for
It
that
makes sense
game
because it was
either.
very quiet when I was watching the
There
game.
you go. And there was a
Yeah.
lot of lamenting about, man, we got to fix this. How are they doing it at Michigan State? I do think Michigan State is very unique in terms of that Izzone alumni presence.
Yeah.
And the advantage that it gives them, because these games all count,
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, just I wanted to bring that up because it was something I had seen yesterday, and I thought it was relevant.
So the next one is poise, and so this is mainly a callback to sort of turnovers have been sort of a bit of a problem for Michigan State recently. Not against Washington, they had 9, and as you predicted, Northwestern had more turnovers than Michigan State at 12-11. Now you could. As far as second chance points, Northwestern had 14 second chance points off those turnovers, and Michigan State only had 7 off their.
No.
Is that right?
No, not second chance.
I'm not saying I'm points to turnovers. Yeah, so Michigan State
MSU had the edge,
18 to 12. Yes, right. You're right.
Yeah.
Turnovers. Yeah, when it's second chance points, that's different. Yeah. So anyway, so not something we expected, but and like I said at the beginning, I think there's a few things that we didn't expect. I don't think we expect Michigan State to shoot from the free throw line as poorly as they did. Certainly not have less free throws than Northwestern. And if you just known those facts, you might have been a little concerned. But the fact that they did so well, really, just that first half, they're just so disrupted defensively to Northwestern.
Well, you mentioned the points off turnovers. MSU had the advantage by 6 there. That was significant. I also think the fact that MSU had 8 steals to 6.
Right. They were very active.
Northwestern. That was very big because, as we talked about, it was one thing that concerned me. Northwestern basically operates to generate steals defensively, and it's a focal point for them. And if they're getting steals, that gives them a chance to get easy baskets, which could be meaningful, because I felt like in a true, if in a game where Michigan State is able to set up defensively, they could probably do a decent job of holding Northwestern down. Northwestern's not a great shooting team. And sure enough, they weren't a great shooting team. Michigan State largely held them down. But the other thing was Michigan State also wasn't getting stripped. They weren't committing those live ball turnovers that led to easy baskets for Northwestern. So that was all really important. The second half, having 7 turnovers for MSU, that was a little disappointing. And it was the reason the game got tighter was 3 things. It was more turnovers on MSU's part. a bad performance at the line by MSU standards.
Yeah, they
You
missed two
know,
1-and-1,
well,
both Jeremy
but
and Zapala missed that
but the
too.
reason I'm saying that is by MSU standards, they still shot 74%.
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah.
That's not bad. That would put you, if that were seasonal average, you'd be like middle of the pack
Yeah.
in the conference, somewhere around there. It just looked bad because of the nature of the misses and how incredible MSU has been all year, but it wasn't bad. But it did contribute a little bit in this game to the score narrowing. And then the third thing was, we'll talk about a little bit in a second, is defensive rebounding. But
Yeah.
but all that said, specific to the turnovers, you look at the totality of the game, I think you got to be pretty happy. To only have 11 against a team that really does make creating turnovers a focus of what they try to do defensively. You're on the road, hostile environment, semi-hostile environment. All of those factors. That's a good day's work, and I think that's the funniest thing is the mistakes were generally not because of things Northwestern was doing. They were Michigan State just committing dumb, unfocused turnovers.
Yeah. And I would say too, what happened at the end of the game, tightening up. Jace Richardson, you had shot that 1-3. I think it was the only three that they shot in the second half. He had that missed three. Then he went to try and get
Yep.
the rebound. Was like under a
Yep.
minute or something. And
Fouled,
fouls.
yes.
Right. They won by 10, which is great. But I think there was a little bit of pressure. They were able to sort of learn some things from that. So hopefully that was a good learning. I think it was a good time to learn a lot of things, especially when you put your freshmen in those situations, because at some point they might be up 3 when something like that same situation happens, and then it's a bigger deal. So I don't know. It's just kind of nice that it happened in this environment where you don't pay for it badly, with a loss.
The glass is half full look at the last 5 minutes. No, seriously.
Yeah.
Of the last 5 minutes or so is exactly what you just said, that, hey, they got tested a little bit in a way that I would argue they got tested in the Ohio State game too. In that way,
Mm-hmm.
they had to make some plays at the end to win that game.
Right.
It was there that if they had failed to do some things to execute, that game could have gone the other way, and it didn't because they made plays. But it's nice to be in that position where you're having to face that, and you're in a spot where you do feel like, well, we're getting tested now. Can we make a play when we need to? But yet it never felt dire.
Yeah.
It felt like there were a few minutes where it was kind of the precursor to that.
Yeah, right.
If we don't get a bucket on this possession, we might find ourselves feeling pressure, as opposed to we're feeling pressure.
Yeah, right.
And they are two different things. But yeah, you could look at it that way, that they were tested a little bit and they came through it, they passed, and that's all a good thing.
Yeah, and I would also say too, with as far as poise, Jaden Akins calling timeout smartly before he gets trapped and out, and then also sometimes just being strong to dribble through those double teams and force them to foul.
He did it a couple times.
I mean, that was very impressive. That's something I don't think he would have even done last year. So his confidence, so that was really good. And then knocking down the free throws when he got there too.
Sure, it's a good point that he had the strength. It was one thing we talked about in regard to this specific point. It said MSU has to be strong with the ball. I thought they were. Again, the mistakes were not MSU getting stripped and somebody being lackadaisical. There was one play where Jaden was in transition and somebody kind of stripped him from behind. That was about it. Yeah. Other than that, I thought Michigan State was actually really solid in that way.
And so the third one, which we just alluded to earlier, second chances. Northwestern had quite a few offensive rebounds. It ended up both teams had 37% offensive rebounding rates. Northwestern was able to convert more of those 14-7 edge in second chances. So, if that's the only thing you do, you might have been a little concerned. But it ended up not mattering too much. And I think largely those second chance points from Northwestern came in the second half. I'd have to look. But they're like 20% offensive rebounding rate in the first half, so not much.
But I'll tell you, I mean, just at the point that I was starting to refer to Michigan State's defensive rebounding as elite, because it was. It was top.
They heard you.
It was top 10 nationally. It feels like kind of where, not quite where the turnovers were a week ago, but starting to get there where you're starting. This is not what we've been doing most of the year. Northwestern's not a good offensive rebounding team. You should not be giving up anything close to a 37% rate.
Yeah.
What MSU did offensively itself is pretty good, actually, because what we said, that was strength on strength. And I wondered how much MSU would be able to get done on its offensive boards against this team. And they did a very good job. They didn't turn it into much point production, as you mentioned, but they did a very good job at that way. So happy on that side, very unhappy with the second half defensive effort.
Yeah, when I calculated, it was a 29% offensive rebounding rate for Northwestern in the first half. So it wasn't like they were totally shutting him down even in the first half. They had 6 and they had 8 in the second half. So
yeah.
So fourth key of the game was pace. A game where this actually was surprising to me because I think we were not expecting much fast break points. And it's interesting when you look at the stats, it's like 7-2 Michigan State edge, which is not surprising. We did not expect Michigan State to get many fast break points, but they had a lot of steals leading to a lot of secondary break.
I only see, I see 5-4 Northwestern.
5-4. It probably depends what service you're using for the stats. Well, anyway, it was not a whole lot.
No, it wasn't much.
But especially in the first half, the pace was exactly what you expect from Michigan State. And even though in the times when the shot clock got kind of down low in the first half, they were able to get really good looks with Jeremy just deciding, okay, now it's time to drive and then kick somewhere and somebody give a layup or something like that.
Yeah. I'm not unhappy here with the first half because it went the way we figured it would. It was impossible for me to believe that Northwestern would give up very much in transition, and they didn't. But I thought Michigan State played with a real sense of purpose and pace in the half court in that first half. Second half, not as much. And again, some of that may have actually been by intent, which I get, but I also struggle with because this team just does not.
I remember Judd doing that all the time, and it drove me crazy. I feel like they go out of the.
Well, the classic team that I remember this being a problem for different reasons, maybe than this one, was the 2014-15 team that ended up in the Final Four, but struggled early in the season, early in the year. And I remember just constantly feeling that they just were not play. That was a team that had to play fast because if they played slow, the odds were better that they were going to make a mistake eventually. They're going to turn the ball over. They had real turnover problems. And that was the truth. And it started to turn when they started to play with more pace in the half court. They were faster. And this team, it's not so much I'm worried about turnovers. It's just I think that they are going to get better shots and they're going to be more efficient in general on offense if they are playing with a purpose in the half court. And in the first half today, they were outstanding in that way. Second half, not so much. But, overall, it's at least a half check mark in this area, I would say.
And the fifth key of the game was make someone else beat you. So the point was that Barnhizer and Martinelli were going to get theirs. And then as Leach, the guy who's 24 years old, he ended up getting with 15 points. I think we had a lot
17. He had 17
because he had a lot on the line in the second half. I think he got to line a lot.
8 of 9 at the line. Yeah.
But there was not really a third person and Barnhizer was pretty much shut down. So they almost needed a fourth person to beat him.
And look, here's the thing. I mean, Martinelli had a great game, 9 for 12 at the line really helped. But you look at the rest of what he did. He was 8 for 18 from the floor. That's not terrible by any means, but he didn't light the world on fire. He was only 2 for 6 from 3. That's considerably below his seasonal average. He's shooting 40 plus, and he was at 33 today. He only had 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 turnover. So even his game, I think Michigan State did okay.
Yeah.
Versus him. He did some good things, but he was not as dominant as a 27-point total would suggest, at least in my opinion. I also thought, too, bringing up those free throws with Leach and with him, the other part of the second half that was frustrating, it was obviously the way the game was officiated. It was a joke. They were that Northwestern was getting to the line far more than they merited the way they were playing. And conversely, Michigan State was not getting the benefit of the same calls. The thing that's important to keep in mind, though, is welcome to the Big Ten on the road. So that's
Yeah.
likely to happen. If
Yeah.
it doesn't, consider yourself fortunate. But that also had something to do with keeping the game closer than it would have otherwise been. Is that Northwestern, I thought, got gifted a lot of free throws in the second half.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Michigan State will be back on Wednesday, back in action, back at the Breslin Center where they take on Penn State. We'll be back probably tomorrow with the day after with a pregame for that. And so again, just a reminder, check out our support page at the Final Four, not the schedule.com/support. There you can find ways to get a hold of any of our sponsors. You get the discounts of 20% off at Nudge Printing for just typing Final Four and checkout. Also, Final Four gets you 15% off work on Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids or 10% off on your work on the gutters for the Brotherhood Just Your Gutters. You can also find ways to support the show financially, either through one-time gifts and PayPal or Venmo or recurring basis on Patreon or Substack. And the links are all there on the support page. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.